Hey crafters, it's Amanda here. I hope that everyone had a great Labor Day weekend. I'm actually filming this on Labor Day. I was up in Dollywood for the weekend with my family, so that was a lot of fun. And since I'm filming this right now, I am off, don't have school, which is great, but tomorrow when I post this, so when you're watching it now, it's time to get back into the real world. So maybe this crafting project will be just what you need to brighten your week. So for today's Tutorial Tuesday, we are going to be making polymer clay beads, and I'm going to be teaching you how to use this really cool method that I discovered a few years ago, and it's called Millefiori. I probably should have looked that up to make sure I'm pronouncing that right, but hopefully I pronounced that right. So today we're going to be making some very simple beads that will look like this. See these big ones? And they look really complicated and like you might have bought them at a store, but they're actually really easy to make because I'm going to show you how to make canes. So I'll give you two more looks of different beads I've made using this method. And you might be looking at these bracelets. I made these years ago, so my wrists have gotten a little bit bigger, so the elastic's all stretched out and they don't quite go all the way around my wrist, so they fit kind of weird right now. But using this method, you can make a lot of really cool beads. They have a nice professional aspect to them, which is nice because when I made these when I was younger, I'd want to wear them, but I didn't want to be that kid who makes like the weird craft stuff and then wears it and everybody like, oh, okay. But I would actually get like lots of valid compliments on these. So let's really quick look at what we need for this project. Clay. I'm using Sculpey clay. This is Sculpey 3. It's just an oven baked clay, which means I bake it in the oven and it gets hard. I'm going to need a baking dish. And the way I'm going to bake these beads, I'm going to use a dish that has some depth, and then I'm going to use bamboo skewers, and I'll have my beads on the bamboo skewer hanging over the dish so that way the beads don't flatten out on one side. If you don't have a bamboo skewer, you can use string, or you can use like a wire coat hanger, and of course you can just bake it flat on a cooking tray. I just like this because then it keeps any of the sides from getting flat. Since you're baking your clay, you'll obviously need an oven, which I don't have featured right now because it's downstairs and I'm in my bedroom. The last thing you will definitely need is some kind of blade or a knife. I'm going to be using this razor blade here because it's very thin, so I can cut through the cane easily, and that'll all make more sense. If you don't have a razor blade, a knife works fine, but I recommend using a thinner knife versus a thicker knife, and that'll come into play later on. At a few different points in this tutorial, we're going to need to roll out a sheet of polymer clay. So there's a couple options here. One, you can just roll it out by hand, smooth it out, and I've gotten okay results with that. Another result is to use a pasta machine. I personally don't have one, but it's very big in the clay world. You can do a quick Google search on it, and basically you just feed the clay through there and it makes a smooth sheet. The final method is to use rulers, parchment paper, and a roller. And I will show you this method later on in the video. So if you think you might want to use this method, grab 2 rulers, wax paper, and some kind of roller itself. Alright, so to make our beads today, we're going to use 2 colors. But before we get into that, I'm going to talk about how the bead is made, because it will give you a better idea of how to pick your colors and just kind of what to expect. So if you look at this bead, it's blue with all these white flecks all over it. And what you might not be able to tell at first is the way this bead is constructed is there's actually this repeating pattern. You can see there's a white in the center and then 4 whites around it that kind of make a circular shape. You can see another one right here. Here's another one of those. Here's another one of those. And they're all slightly different, but you can possibly see this is a really good, well-defined one. But the way these beads are constructed is you start by rolling a round bead, and then from your cane you cut off these slices, and they're going to end up being these little circles with this pattern on it or whatever pattern you make. And then you put those pattern thin slices all around your circular bead, roll the circular bead, and then you're left with the bead with all these really intricate patterns all over it. So that might still be a little bit confusing, but hopefully that gives you a little bit of an idea of what we're working towards. So you're going to want 2 colors. The 2 colors I'm using today are going to be this nice coral and this nice yellow. And your colors can be whatever colors you want to be. Generally speaking, when you make canes and when you do these kinds of beads, the better contrasting of the colors they are, the better your beads will turn out. So here we've got a light color and a dark color, so they turned out really nicely. So again, a darker color and a lighter color. I'm going to use the coral color in the center. So the coral will be like the white on this bead, and the yellow will be like the blue. So the first step is we want to take a nice sized piece of the coral and we just want to roll it into a log. So you can just put it on the table and start rolling it. Of course, before you start working with your clay, make sure you condition it. You can just knead it around, push it around, and conditioning is especially important when working with canes because you don't want any air bubbles because that'll mess up your patterns. Alright, so I've got a nice little tubular shape here. Nice cylinder. I'm just going to kind of smush off the ends here, make them a little bit flatter, so that way I can use as much clay. And I'm not going to be super careful about the ends of my cane, just because this pattern isn't particularly detailed. So I'm going to set that off to the side. The next thing we want to do is we want to roll this into a flat sheet that we can cover our coral cane with. So if you want to, you can just push it out with your hand. A second method uses the 2 rulers, wax paper, and an actual roller. And so with this method, you're just going to put your clay down, put your rulers on either side of the clay, and then fold the parchment paper back onto it. The reason for putting it between the parchment paper is just so that way if it's a roller that you use for cooking, then you don't, get the polymer clay on it. And then you put it between the 2 rulers because once we get it rolled down a lot, it'll be the thickness of the ruler. So it'll create a nice, really even consistency. So I'm going to work on rolling this out here. You may want to kind of mush it out a little bit first before you start rolling it. But you want to end up, whatever method you use, if you use this method or if you put it in a pasta machine, you want to end up with a nice, even, flat piece of clay. One other tip is if your clay starts to curl upward like this, take your whole little contraption and just flip it over and roll it this way to kind of even out that curl. So after a little bit of working and rolling, I've got this nice flat piece of clay here. And the edges aren't particularly neat, that's just kind of what happens when you roll your clay out. What we want to do next is we want to roll this sheet around this tube. So you want to make sure that it's wide enough this way, and you also want to make sure that it's long enough that it can roll all the way around. And fortunately, I can with this piece. You can trim it up a little bit before you roll it up, or you don't have to. I'm going to trim it up just a little bit. You can see again my ends aren't completely neat, but that's okay for this pattern. You can see the clay meets, so you want to make sure you don't have any gaps, and just kind of pinch it around, get it to lay on there flat, and then you're going to roll this tube some more. When you roll this tube, you want to watch out for air bubbles, so you want to work from the center out towards the edges, and that will help prevent air bubbles from forming. And we want to roll this out pretty thin, because we're going to cut this into smaller pieces in just a bit. You can see I've been rolling for a little bit here. My tube's getting longer. I'm going to keep rolling because I'm going to cut this tube into 5 different pieces. So you don't have to make it crazy long, but you do want to make it long enough that it can easily be divided into 5 different pieces. Alright, so now I've got this nice long tube of yellow, and if you look at the ends, you can see there's that coral still in there. But what's really cool about the canes is the way it works is if we cut through here and then we look at the side, we're going to have a coral center with a yellow ring around it. And actually that's the next step that we need to do. We need to cut this cane into 5 roughly equal pieces. So I'm just going to take my razor, again, be very careful. I'm going to cut the ends off just so that way they all stay nice and crisp. So you can start to see how it's going to look like there. The ends are always going to be a little goofy looking, but that's okay. There's a better look at the shape there. And I'm going to cut this tube into 5 roughly equal pieces. So I'm going to do 4 slices. So just kind of eyeball it. So 1 and 5. You can see they all line up pretty well. Also, you may have noticed when I cut, it kind of smushed the cane. With this particular pattern, I like it letting the cane get smushed. You can see here how these tend to have a more ovalish look than roundish look, and that's what I'm going for with this cane. If you want to avoid the ovalish look and end up with a more round look like this one in your final pattern, you can put the cane in the freezer for about 30 minutes and then make sure you're cutting with a very sharp knife. That will give you a crisper look. But I kind of like the fun, whimsical look of this one. So the last thing to do is we're going to take these little canes and we're going to make a bigger cane. So I'm just going to arrange them around one of the center ones. And so I've got them arranged around it. You can see there's a lot of gaps around this one. So that's going to also cause it to round out a little more. So I'm just going to kind of gently smush it with my fingers. Here's a look at the other side. Again, the ends aren't going to line up perfectly, and that's okay. Just kind of start smushing it together. And what my goal is here is I'm going to roll this big chunk like we did at the very beginning. So I'm just going to gently apply pressure in the middle. and start working it longer. It takes a little bit of time, a little bit of practice. You know, sometimes I roll canes and they turn out really sloppy in the end. So if your cane doesn't turn out perfectly, that's totally fine. There is a bit of a learning curve, but also you'll still end up with some kind of cool pattern, even if it's not quite the one we're going for. And so at this point you want to roll it very thin, and this is what we're going to use to cover our beads. So if you look at this bead here again, you can see I rolled this cane when I made this one to be about that wide of a circumference. So just roll your bead until it's as detailed or as large of a pattern as you want. I'll give you some other looks. These ones I actually did a different pattern, but you can see the pattern fairly well. It's kind of big. This one, I rolled it really small, so the pattern is very detailed. So whatever look you're going for, roll it as tiny or don't roll it very much at all for whatever look you're going for. Alright, my cane is finished. It is all rolled out, and now it's time for the moment of truth. I will point out one thing. I had an air bubble here towards the beginning, and I wasn't really able to get it out, and just for the sake of this tutorial, I didn't bother with it. Normally I would, but because there was an air bubble in there, it ended up popping down here, so you can kind of see it's not as smooth and even. So that's why when you roll, you want to be really even and consistent and roll from the middle out towards the edges to avoid air bubbles. But also you'll notice that even this end that didn't have an air bubble, it still looks a little scary, but hopefully once we cut this cane, it'll look really good, which actually I haven't cut this yet at all, so I'm a little nervous to be cutting it for the first time on camera, because like I said, I'm still somewhat new to making canes myself, so they don't always turn out perfect, but here we go. So I'm just going to gently cut down through here, kind of make a little slit, and then push down, and that'll prevent the edges from squishing. Check it out! You can see the pattern really prettily in there. I am very happy with how this turned out. So you can see both ends here, and that pattern's going to run all the way through this cane. So if I keep cutting off slices, then I will get these little shapes. So one application of this is I've already rolled some beads here. I'm going to cut a bunch of these really thin. When you cut, as I said, you know how it kind of smushes on the one side? Again, you can put it in the freezer for about 30 minutes and then use a very sharp knife to cut it, and that will prevent it from bending as much. But if you don't want to go through that, just if this way, see how it's smushed this way? I'll cut it the tall way this time, and then I'll roll it a quarter turn each time I cut to just kind of balance out how much it gets smushed down. So I'm just going to cut thin little slivers off of this cane. So now I've cut a few out, and I'll come back and cut some more out later. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these little patterns and I'm just going to stick them on the bead. Just push a little, just push gently so that way they stick. Just like this, nestle them all against each other all the way around the bead. You know, these look like the cinnamon rolls that you get in a can. The pattern, just because of the colors I did. Just completely cover the bead with as many or as few of the pattern that you want. The cane sliver. So now it's going to look like this. And the last thing you need to do is just roll this together. So put in your palms and roll in a circular motion. All you have to do is roll your bead until it looks like this. And the cane pieces, they just kind of blend right in to the ball frame that you originally made. The last thing you'll want to do is take your bamboo skewer and poke a hole in it. To poke a hole, I come through on the one side, just gently kind of twist it if you need to, and I come through until it just barely starts to poke out the side. Then I'm going to work it back out, come to that little bit on this side where it was poking out, and then come through that way. And that's just going to make sure that you don't end up with a lopsided bead, but it'll keep its nice round shape. And I'm just going to keep rolling this back onto this bead, just kind of keep twisting the rod, twisting the bead, because I'm going to cook it on here just like this. I'll set it on my tray, go bake it downstairs, and then I'll show you the finished results. So check it out. These are the finished beads. I've taken them out of the oven. I will give you one more tip, that when you do take them out of the oven, you probably want to use an oven mitt to slide them off the bamboo skewer pretty soon, because it'll make sure that you're able to get it off easily while the clay still has a little bit of give, and you don't have to end up getting a bead stuck on the bamboo skewer. But I think these beads are super cute. I'll give you another close-up look here. but just very playful, fun beads, yet also very polished and elegant. And if you use the method I showed you in today's video, you can make some really intricate patterns. You don't have to make all your canes be the same color. You can make the centers different colors. You can repeat the process with even more. Instead of cutting it into 5 pieces, you could cut it into 7 pieces. And you can use this basic method to make a variety of really cool beads. So I hope that you guys enjoyed this, and I'll also go ahead and remind you, if you didn't catch my last polymer clay video, I am no polymer clay expert, so if I'm able to make these really cool beads, then you definitely can too. You also don't want to miss next week's tutorial Tuesday, because it's going to build off of this one. I've got a really fun project that I think you guys will like. And as always, please give this video a like. I know I say this every week in every video, but if you haven't done it, you need to give this video a like, okay? And also, if you've been watching my videos and you still haven't subscribed, what are you doing? So hit the subscribe button below, hit the little bell thing beside it so that way you get notified and you'll never miss one of my videos. Happy crafting! So I'm just going to throw this out that you might have noticed this, but in my first time I did a clay video, I filmed me putting it in the oven. This time I did not. If you are wondering why, there's going to be a box that's going to appear somewhere here. You need to go click that box and you need to watch like the last 20 seconds or so. I'm like ashamed of myself and I didn't want that happening again, so that's why I didn't film me putting them in the oven this time.